Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for being with us here today for our 2021 Autograph Series Luncheon. My name's Alexandra Vandekamp, and I'm the Executive Director of Gemini Inc. I just wanted to take 1 second to give a huge warm welcome to all of the high schoolers in the audience and the educators. We are so thrilled to have you here with us today. Gemini Inc., if you don't know what it is, we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. Did you know that we've been a part of the city's literary arts for over 27 years? Our mission is simple and pivotal: to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. We thrive on offering unforgettable encounters with the written word, just like our event today with our amazing author, Ben Fountain. Ben Fountain is able to straddle the worlds of fiction and nonfiction seamlessly, from short stories to political essays. He's a remarkable witness to our complex times, reporting on the current state of America with honesty, poetic insight, and no small amount of humor. Today, you are in store for a wonderful lineup of literary voices, all connected to the power of the written word. You will hear from our honorary chair, Secretary Julián Castro. Then you will be treated to a short talk between Secretary Castro and Ben Fountain, followed by a reading by Mr. Fountain himself. After that, we're thrilled to have our featured moderator, Yvette Benavides, Professor of English and Creative Writing at Our Lady of the Lake University, conduct a Q&A and conversation with Ben Fountain. I, first of all, want you to look at our chat Q&A here on the screen. Students out there, we want you to take advantage of it. Leave comments about what you're hearing, and please post questions for Mr. Fountain himself. Towards the end of his conversation with Yvette Benavides, he will be answering some of the student and audience questions. Take part in our virtual conversation. We want to hear from you. Before kicking off our main event, I just wanted to take a moment to thank the sponsors that made our 2021 Autograph Series possible. We could not do our work without them. I also wanted to pause a moment and thank our board and staff for all that they do every day to make our mission possible. They are the magic behind all of our programming and all that you see today. So a huge, immense gratitude goes out to these sponsors: Russell Hill Rogers Fund for the Arts, Marquise AV, our production company today, Tito's Handmade Vodka, who designed our special signature cocktail for the evening, the John Newman Family Charitable Fund of the San Antonio Area Foundation, Hugh and Sarah Fitzsimmons, Martin Rico, and Judge Bonnie Reed and Stu Schlossberg. If you've not had a chance, we have this beautiful platform surrounding our luncheon today. Take a moment, look at the sponsor page, look at the speaker page, find out more about all of our other wonderful sponsors and our powerful speakers that will be a part of today's luncheon event. Now I'm delighted to introduce our honorary chair. Julián Castro served as U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama from 2014 to 2017. Before that, he was mayor of our very own San Antonio, the youngest mayor of a top 50 American city at the time. After his historic campaign for president in 2020, Secretary Castro launched People First Future to help elect bold, progressive candidates whose campaigns are focused on improving the lives of the people they hope to represent one day. Did you know that San Antonio was the first major city in Texas to have a poet laureate? Well, Mayor of San Antonio, Julián Castro appointed Dr. Carmen Tafoya as San Antonio's first poet laureate. The appointment of a poet laureate has encouraged connectivity among local literacy organizations, poets, and the general public, expanding public awareness of the literary arts. We are so grateful for Secretary Castro's belief in the role of the writing arts in our lives and communities. Our current poet laureate is the unstoppable Andrea Vocab Sanderson. Check her out online, find out what she's doing. She's very active on social media. She does things every day to empower San Antonians through poetry. Now I invite you to sit back, let the literary show begin, and we will take it from here. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Alexandra. I want to just say a huge gracias, thank you to you and to Gemini Inc. It's been a pleasure to serve as the honorary chair of this part of the autograph series. I've been a big fan of the work of Gemini Inc. for many, many years, and the way that you uplift the literary arts, and particularly the written word. I also want to give a shout out and thank all of the sponsors and the supporters of Gemini Inc. for making the events today possible, and to our educators for the work that y'all do day in and day out, particularly under these circumstances during the last year of COVID-19, to help ensure that our young people are as knowledgeable and prepared and creative as possible. And especially to all of the young people who are watching today, I want to thank you for being a part of the Gemini Inc. family, for your interest and love of the written word, for the creativity that you bring to it, and for the care that you put into all of it. And I wanted to address you just briefly also in light of what has been a very tough year. Y'all are living through times, we're all living through times that I think it's safe to say that we have not ever seen before, at least not in modern times. These are unique times. And even the last few weeks of what we've seen reminds me of a quote from Waldo Emerson, that violence is not power, but the absence of power. And you think about what we've seen with hateful attacks, particularly against Asian Americans in our country, the mass shootings that we've seen over the last few weeks and really for many years now. And also, unfortunately, the police violence that has occurred in different communities in our country. It reminds us that by learning the written word, you learn how to express yourself. And that empowers you. By understanding how to express yourself, you gain power. The power to better educate yourself, to better reach your own dreams, the power to change minds, the power to inspire. Hopefully, in the years to come, also the power to help create a nation and a world where everyone can live with dignity. And ultimately, the power to help bring about a time when we don't see violence, but we see peace among people who are different, and understanding and compassion. Your creativity can have a real impact on the world that we know, the world that we live in. And all of us look to you, the next generation, with an enormous amount of hope and belief that you can help bring about that nation and that world. It's a pleasure to serve as honorary chair, and like everybody else that's part of this Gemini Inc. family, I'm here cheering you on, in awe of everything that you are and that I know that you will be in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Castro, for those beautiful words. I loved that comment. Violence is not power, but lack of power. And yeah, we here at Gemini, we believe in the power of the written word, and we see young people do amazing things every day. All they need is that space to be creative, and they teach us so many things every day. So thank you for those powerful words. I loved that. And now I'm thrilled to bring a wonderful author who is an amazing voice for these very complicated times. I'm just going to take a moment and give you a little bit of background on Ben Fountain, and then he'll come on and have a short conversation with our honorary chair. Ben Fountain is an attorney turned award-winning essayist and author. His debut novel, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, has been dubbed the Catch-22 of the Iraq War. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was a finalist for the National Book Award. It was also turned into a movie in 2016 by Oscar-winning director Ang Lee. There's great YouTube video clips of it. Check it out, everyone. It's a wonderful, powerful rendition of the book. Fountain is also the author of the 2007 collection of short stories, Brief Encounters with Che Guevara. Very memorable title. And it was inspired by his intense interest in Haiti and his many trips to that country. This story collection won the Penn Hemingway Award, a big award, and the Barnes & Noble Discover Award for fiction. In 2016, Fountain wrote a series of essays published in The Guardian on the U.S. presidential election that were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize and commentary. He later turned these musings on the 2016 election into his masterpiece of political essays, Beautiful Country Burn Again, Democracy, Rebellion, and Revolution. Known for his wicked sense of humor and razor-sharp insight, Fountain interrogates every aspect of American life. From presidential campaigns to NFL Sunday to food fads and our media glorification of war. Not very much escapes his literary gaze. I've never encountered a writer who does such amazing things with statistics. As one example, in his latest book of essays, he has this quote: in 2015, Americans spent $4.9 billion on Cheetos, Funyuns, and Doritos. So that's just a beginning glimpse into the richness of his literary world. Rolling Stone has a great way to sum up the power of Ben Fountain as a voice for our times. They say, there may be no writer alive today who better captures the manic, fevered, paranoid style in 21st century America than Ben Fountain. So please, everyone, help me welcome him to the virtual stage. We are delighted to have him as our 2021 autograph author.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandra. No one has ever introduced me with that lovely statistic about Doritos, Funyuns, and Cheetos, which is definitely one of the highlights of my literary career. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I also want to thank you for your tremendous organizational and communication skills, which rival those of an Army Quartermaster General. You've done an excellent job in keeping me on track, and I just want to say thanks to you and the whole Gemini crew. Everyone has been first rate, and it's clear to me that this is an organization that's hitting on all cylinders. You guys are now in your 28th year of service, and that's a tremendous testament to the people of the organization and also to the people of San Antonio for supporting this great organization for 27 plus years. So hats off to you. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be your autograph speaker this year. And it's a great honor and a great pleasure to have the chance to chat with Secretary Julián Castro for a few minutes. So Secretary Castro, if I might start our conversation with a question. Mm-hmm. And that is, I followed the current political discourse, I suppose, as closely as any non-professional. I read the newspapers, a couple of newspapers a day. I read the news magazines. I watch cable TV. I watch Fox. I watch MSNBC. I watch CNN. I watch PBS. Some days I don't watch anything. I just need a break from it. But amid all the noise and rhetoric and tough talk and twittering, sometimes I hear the voice of Bob Marley in my head. And he's singing, "In this bright future, you can't forget your past." And so my question to you is, well, I want to start by talking about the past. And my question to you is, to what extent should we as a society and should our leaders be looking to history for guidance as we debate and formulate our way forward for the country?
It's good to be with you, Ben, and thank you so much for being a part of this event. Everybody is thrilled to have you today. I think that understanding of history has a tremendous role to play in informing the decisions that we make today as a country. You know, it's interesting. I was in Half Price Books. I think you're in Texas, as I understand
Yes,
it.
I'm in
We
Dallas.
had Half Price Books over there
Mm-hmm.
about 2 months ago with my kids, and we were walking through, and I saw that I guess it's like 1976, a book by Woodward and Bernstein, The Final Days, which was looking back then a couple of years later after Watergate, with the benefit only of 2 years of hindsight, but sort of some of the thinking through the lessons learned of that time period and how they might be applicable to now. But I think in general, understanding our history, understanding the aspirations that we had as a country, and the obstacles that were faced and the mistakes that were made, and also the victories that were had, and how we proceeded from there. I think that it's fair to say that we don't inform our public policy enough with those lessons of history. And also, you know, to connect this a little bit to you know, the students that are watching, also with understanding of civics and the need to have a perspective on who we are as a country and what we've been about and what we've been aiming for. The last year has been a moment where we see the value of investing in that, from policymakers all the way to third graders. So I hope that we do in the years to come.
You know, I want to let's talk about history with regard to the current debate over infrastructure. And we know that President Biden has submitted an ambitious infrastructure plan to Congress. But here in Texas, we had our own particular problem with infrastructure in February. And I'm sure no one has forgotten that yet. But there was a wholesale collapse of the power grid in 21st century America, you know, in one of the leading states in America. That's an unheard of event. It caused tremendous hardship. At least 130 people died, you know, terrible deaths during that. So I want to ask you, do you think it would be helpful if we looked specifically to the history of the New Deal and all the laws and programs that delivered dependable electric power throughout the country for guidance as we try to reform and rebuild our power grid here in Texas?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And you're right. I mean, I think for a lot of people, this was a shock that we could have this kind of failure in 2021. Especially, I mean, to talk about history, recent history, when we saw a miniature version of this 10 years ago in 2011, and the lessons of that experience were not learned and then put into practice in the intervening decade. You know, in our own history in Texas, right, we have a history of LBJ and the funding of the electrification and the pride that people still take in that in rural communities throughout the state and in other places. One of the things that's given me the most hope early in this administration has been, it really seems like more Americans are ready to take that view, that longer view of investment that we used to have in this country, whether it was in the New Deal or the Great Society, of saying, look, number one, in real concrete ways, we are all in this together. Instead of focusing on fighting, let's focus on, if we make these investments, how can everybody benefit, no matter who you are? And I think when it comes to the electrical grid and the ability to deliver reliable energy, we absolutely should make those investments. And I'm encouraged that the Biden infrastructure proposal, it's a $2.1 trillion infrastructure proposal, includes a lot of investment in traditional infrastructure, but also in clean energy and the ability to deliver that in the future, which I think really is our future. Many people will benefit if we're able to do that, in addition to 21st century infrastructure like broadband, which still has not reached a lot of rural communities. When I was HUD secretary, we did something called Connect Home to try and connect low-income families in public housing to broadband at home. There's so much we still need to do there, but we absolutely can learn from the historic investments that FDR and LBJ and others made that continue to pay dividends today.
Absolutely. I mean, some people say we can't afford to spend on infrastructure. My feeling is we can't afford not to.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be done. Let's talk a little bit about public education. Mm-hmm. And I know that's something you emphasized and did tremendous things for during your time as mayor, especially in the pre-K field. And then when you were running for president, you proposed that college tuition, at least for the first 2 years, should be free. I mean, public education has been getting the short end of the funding stick for many years now in the United States. And along with that, we see something like $1.5 trillion in student debt currently outstanding. And I would say, when we're thinking about that, we should look to the history of public education in this country. I mean, for example, the history of the 19th century land grant universities that really pushed higher education across the country. And then in the 20th century, especially starting in the 1920s, the tremendous initiatives for public secondary education in this country. I think it's fair to say that no society in history had ever devoted so many resources to educating a broad swath of its population. And the thing about it is it worked. We educated millions of people across multiple generations, and we did it without saddling our citizens with massive individual debt. And so by the middle years of the 20th century, the U.S. was the best educated, most prosperous, healthiest country on earth. And it seems to me we're doing ourselves a disservice by ignoring our own history and the successes of our history in public education.
Well, I mean, you bring up a great point, which is today, when we've been living in this Reagan era, this era since 1981, really maybe a little bit, let's go back to at least Prop 13, which was California in 1978, which really cut off the legs of being able to fund public education appropriately in many ways in California. But I feel like we're at this inflection point where people are seeing the value again of making those investments. And that's the thing. We used to make tremendous investments in public education. There was a time when it wasn't expected that people were going to go on to high school, and then high school was added. There was a time, and in many states, it's not mandatory, compulsory to go to kindergarten still, but a lot of parents, most send their kids to kindergarten. And the story of the last 20 years has been the expansion of pre-K programs in states around the country. And now, when we know we live in a world where brain power really is the new currency of success, college is not a luxury, or some sort of higher education, even if it's vocational, to prepare you for the types of jobs that exist out there today. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And our investments should reflect that, the way that under a different economic system, in the 19th century, we made those decisions to invest in the people what we needed to so that they would be prepared. We need to do that again in the 21st century. And if we do that, I'm convinced that we can have broad-based success, broad-based economic advancement, and in that way be able to get, in some ways, beyond these fights among different groups of people, different parts of the country, urban versus rural, and so forth. There are general investments we can make that are going to lift everybody up. Absolutely.
I have one last question for you, and that is that it has to do with the vast inequalities of wealth and opportunity that are prevalent in the country today. And when I'm thinking about that, I find myself often thinking about Franklin Roosevelt's proposal for an economic Bill of Rights, which he put forward in 1944. And then Martin Luther King picked up that cause toward the end of his life. In the last few years, he began advocating for an economic Bill of Rights. And basically, this Bill of Rights would vest all citizens with the right to a job, with the right to a living wage, the right to decent housing, education, and healthcare. And the principle behind the Economic Bill of Rights was that democracy isn't possible in a society where there are vast disparities of wealth, where a relative few people have tremendous wealth and power, and those on the lower economic rungs are struggling simply to survive. It's hard to participate in democracy when you're trying to hold down 2 or 3 or 4 jobs and you're barely making ends meet. So do you think that would be useful to come at a lot of our problems from the notion of an economic bill of rights to protect our economic rights? We've got a bill of rights to protect our political rights, but the world has evolved since 1789. And perhaps we do need an economic bill of rights.
Yeah, one of the things that's been so striking, we all hear stats all the time and so forth. One of the things that's been so striking is how much money billionaires in our country have made, even during this pandemic, when we have millions of families that are on the brink of eviction right now. We have folks working in meatpacking plants in the fields, experiencing much higher rates of COVID infection. And this inequality has grown a lot. I do think, and I think this was part of Bernie Sanders' push in his own way, and that some of us, whether it was me or Senator Warren, a couple of others, perhaps not with an economic bill of rights per se, but in our own version, talked about the trying to ensure that everybody can live with dignity. And how do you build that out? Well, you have a healthcare system that absolutely covers everybody. You see housing as a human right, which I and others talked about. You see economic opportunity as something that should be treated as a right. Universal basic income was something very much in the 2020 campaign, and one that is growing in popularity in municipalities, whether it's places like Stockton or even elements in the American Rescue Plan that have sort of a pilot project with UBI. So I do think that in some important ways, we're moving closer to that vision. As you know, we had that vision that was articulated. Of course, it also left some people out back then, right?
Yes.
Racial groups and so forth. But what would have been so wonderful for our country and what we can have is, it would have been wonderful if that vision had encompassed everybody and then had moved forward too. Instead, other forces of division were able to pit people against each other because, to distract, I think, and take away from that vision and have people infighting. So, the problem is this person that is beneath you, that looks different from you. Instead of all of us working together toward exactly that kind of life that we can have in this country and hopefully one day in the world. I'm not naive. I know that all of that is far off, but I absolutely believe in that vision for everybody in our country. And I'm really hopeful because I think that we have this moment after this pandemic where in a real way, people have recognized a little bit more than they did before. Hey, we are all in this together. You still see the division and the back and forth, and I don't want to wear a mask and all that, but there's more of a coalition of people who believe that we do have to take care of one another, and that is the seed for progress, I think.
Absolutely. Well, Secretary Castro, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I hope that we can continue the conversation sometime, but in the meantime, best wishes to you. I and a lot of other people are looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Thanks a lot, Ben. And my congratulations on all of your success. And gracias, thank you again for doing this for the students in Gemini Inc.
A pleasure. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I am going to read for about 10 minutes. I'm going to read from the nonfiction book about the 2016 election first, and then we'll go over to the novel Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. When I was covering the 2016 election, the Guardian sent me to Iowa to cover the Iowa caucuses, and one night I found myself at the field house at University of Iowa for a Bernie Sanders rally. And there were a number of speakers who came on before Bernie Sanders did. And so I'll just read a little bit from that episode. So we're at the field house at University of Iowa, 5,000 extremely excited, hyper students. And this is one of the speakers who comes up. Next up is a 20-something star from the Hunger Games who talks in that punch-drunk California way of being super amazed at everything. Wow, Iowa's crazy, man. He marvels in genial stoner style. He achieves a mighty roar for his critique of student debt, and for good reason. Undergraduate student debt, a relatively recent phenomenon in America, will warp and stunt the entire trajectory of many of these lives. I invariably think of my father at such moments. He had a PhD in education from Chapel Hill and spent most of his career running community colleges. When asked his profession, his answer tended to be the matter of fact, I'm a schoolman. In the late 1970s, he served on a state commission studying proposals for the latest innovation in higher education, government-guaranteed student loans offered by private companies. He arrived at a negative view of such programs. Tuition would skyrocket, he predicted, while public funding for higher education would shrink, and the gap would be filled by students taking on unconscionable levels of debt. His analysis was not a popular one, and he was dropped from a second iteration of the commission. Some 30 years and $1.5 trillion of outstanding student debt later, he'd grown disgusted by higher education's chirping insistence on invest in yourself as justification for piling mountains of debt onto 18-year-olds. We've got it backwards, he'd say. It should be the other way around. Society is supposed to be investing in the students, turning out the doctors and lawyers and scientists and engineers and teachers who are going to keep it moving forward. His point, that education is a collective as well as an individual good, that it's a value multiplier for society, returning benefits far in excess of the public cost, is borne out by decades of research and study. There is, for example, the Solov residual, which attributes most of the rise in productivity in modern societies to technological progress in the broadest sense, namely the advanced transmission and application of knowledge. Another example, the Flynn effect, the generation by generation rise in IQ scores in modern societies, and the crucial role that formal education plays in developing our capacity for higher level cognitive tasks. Further to Dad's point, nobody gives you an education. Even if she doesn't pay a dime in tuition, the student is making a momentous investment in terms of the time, talent, and energy she devotes to her education, as well as the wages she forgoes during her years of study. The student is doing her part. It seems only fair that society make a no less equal investment in her education. Applied broadly, this anthropological equation has a name, the social contract, and history shows that by upholding its side of the bargain in education, by investing lavishly in public education over the course of a century or more, especially in the decades immediately following World War II, America made itself rich and did so without condemning its youth to debt or hell. Here's a modest notion for our country. A society structured in such a way that the economics of higher education and healthcare don't ruin the lives of millions of its citizens. Are we at least allowed to dream? We are. Even Americans in hardcore capitalist America are allowed to dream of a life in which the cost of college and healthcare are less than ruinous threats. How much energy, practical and psychological, do we burn each day stressing over, dealing with, the dollar cost of these two areas of life? And how much energy would be freed for pursuits of excellent happiness if we were relieved of worst-case scenarios? If these goods weren't even necessarily free or nominal, but manageable? So much that wasn't possible before now would be, practically a paradise of possibility. Take your education as far as you will, without wrecking your future with debt. Change jobs, change professions, strike out on your own without exiling yourself from the mercies of modern medicine. Yes, the mind boggles. We're just dreaming, of course, not making policy, but it's a useful exercise nonetheless. A certain kind of politician is always gassing about freedoms, American freedoms, best and freest in the world. But it's in trying to imagine a life in which education and healthcare come with the citizen package, a life a bit closer to that of your average Spaniard or Swede, that we confront just how stingy and cramped our poor American notion of freedom has become. So now I'll read a little bit from the novel Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. And as many of you know, I think, this novel follows a group of American soldiers who have come home from Iraq, and they're being hosted as guests of honor at a Dallas Cowboys game at a Dallas Cowboys football game. And Billy Lynn is the title character. He's one of those soldiers. Let's see. In my book, the owner of the Cowboys is named Norman Oglesby. But in this particular scene, Billy finds himself talking to a high-ranking Cowboys executive named Mr. Jones, and they're in a fancy schmancy part of Texas Stadium, and it's kind of a clubhouse atmosphere. And so Billy is talking with this executive. You know what I'd like to know, Billy blurts, suddenly bold or careless with that fresh hit of bourbon in his gut, is how do you do it? I mean, business, all this. How do you make it happen? He falters, racks his brain for intelligent-sounding business vocabulary. I mean, like, where do you start? Where does the money come from for the stadium, the land and construction and everything, and paying the players and the coaches? I mean, we're talking about some serious cash outlay here. Mr. Jones laughs, not unkindly. Pro football is a capital-intensive business, that's true, he says in a patient, teaching a moron voice. The key is leverage relative to cash flow, whether you can generate enough of a revenue stream to service your debt and still cover your current obligations. So it's a fair question. In a way, it's the question. Billy nods as if he knew all along. But just from a tactical standpoint, say when Mr. Oglesby decided he wanted to buy the Cowboys, what did he do? I know he didn't just whip out his credit card and say, I think I'll buy the Cowboys today. No, Mr. Jones smiles. It wasn't quite like that. But let me tell you, leverage is a beautiful thing. In the right hands, it can literally move mountains. And Norman Oglesby, let's just say my boss is a genius when it comes to structuring deals. Holy shit, Billy thinks. We're talking business. He is having an actual adult business conversation with a high-ranking Cowboys executive. An extraordinary moment in his life, even though he knows he's barely or not even hanging on. And Mr. Jones is totally humoring him. But still, he's here. They're talking. Then Mr. Jones's cell phone chirps. He checks the screen, flashes a smile at Billy, and steps away. Billy gets a refresher shot of bourbon for his coat and stands off to the side of the bar, thinking. Life in the Army has been a crash course in the scale of the world, which is such that he finds himself in a constant state of wonder as to how things come to be. Stadiums, for example, airports, the interstate highway system, wars. He wants to know, how is it paid for? Where did the billions come from? He imagines a shadowy, math-based parallel world that exists not just beside but amid the physical world, a transparent interlay of matrix-style numbers through which flesh and blood humans move like fish through kelp. This is where the money lives, an integer-based realm of code and logic, geometric modules of cause and effect, the realm of markets, contracts, transactions, elegant vectors of fiber optic agency, whereby mind-boggling sums of mysterious wealth shoot around the world on beams of light. It seems the airiest thing there is, and yet the realest. But how you enter that world, he has no idea, except by passage through that other foreign country called college. And that ain't happening. He will not return to the classroom, ever. The mere thought inflames a whole host of piss-offs and grudges that go all the way back to kindergarten, not to mention the sheer soul-sucking boredom of those years. If there is real knowledge to be had in the Stovall public schools, he never found it. and only lately has he started to feel the loss, the huge criminal act of his state-sanctioned ignorance as he struggles to understand the wider world, how it works, who gains, who loses, who decides. It is not a casual thing, this knowledge. In a way, it might be everything. A young man needs to know where he stands in the world, not just as a matter of basic human dignity, but as determinants in the ways and means of survival and what you might hope to gain by honest effort. So I'll stop reading there, and now I'm going to turn it over for a moment to Florinda Flores-Brown, who's going to introduce our featured moderator for the next part of the program.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was a wonderful reading. I really, really enjoyed that. So my name is Florinda Flores-Brown, and I am the Partner Program Director at Gemini, Inc., and it is my honor to introduce our moderator, Yvette Benavides. She is a professor of English and creative writing at Our Lady of the Lake University, and in addition to hosting Texas Public Radio's Book Public podcast, she co-authored the book San Antonio 365 on This Day in History, and she serves as the anthology series editor of EQ, Creative Nonfiction on Social Equity, which will be coming out in 2022. Please welcome Yvette.
Thank you so much, Florinda. And thank you to everybody at Gemini, Inc. I just want to echo what everyone has said so far about how grateful we are to the educators, to the students. I also want to thank the behind-the-scenes crew, Rob and his small army. They've been so helpful. It's so interesting to me. I've been sitting here just tracing the line from speaker to speaker and making connections and thinking about what Ben just said about Billy Lynn, looking at the Stovall education system and feeling so bereft and sensing such a loss over what didn't happen and what will not happen as a consequence. And Ben Fountain's father's words about how society is supposed to invest in students and that there is this social contract. There is this idea here, I think, that's very strong within Gemini Inc. to do remarkable outreach with teachers and with students and with folks in the community, and to do, I think, more than their share along this idea of the social contract. So I feel very honored to be here, and I'm so excited to talk to Ben. Ben, I've been doing a lot of research about you, Googling your name and looking at all kinds of things. And I'm such a fan of your work. I find so interesting the way that you approach nonfiction and fiction. We're all sort of nonfiction writers, I think. I mean, we all can tell stories about ourselves. But it's an interesting idea if we think about what's largely attributed to Mark Twain, who said that the truth is stranger than fiction. You know, we say this in nonfiction all the time. I say it in my nonfiction classes all the time, as if to say it's more interesting, because you can't make it up, right? And then there's something with fiction that I think about a lot, which is you just can't tell a truer truth than we sometimes find in fiction. So that's something I admire about your work, that you're able to bring stories, true stories that tell the truths and that you can't make up. And then the stories, the fiction stories that are so infused with history and research and current events and so many things that bring to the fore the things that are, sort of real life sorts of things. So I just appreciate that very much. But in your 2018 address to your alma mater at Duke University, I watched the video. You said that one reason that you went to law school was to avoid writing. You said you had this impulse to try to write fiction and you were trying to suppress it. You said, it scared me. It seemed like the hardest thing a person could try to do. And then you also shared that when you made the decision to try writing, you left your law career. You sat at your kitchen table and you said you wrote a really terrible short story straight away. And then you said it took 10 years to write a story that pleased you. I was so struck by this idea because you seem really prolific, and I just couldn't imagine that you had this sort of stalling start. I could only imagine that there was a little bit of perfectionism early on, and maybe there still is, but how do you now talk about writing? So do you still think about it as something you're trying to avoid and are afraid of? Or has that answer kind of changed?
Well, if I'm still trying to avoid it, I've done a terrible job.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky to be able to write. And I will say for the first 4 or 5 years, everything I wrote disgusted me. It was really bad. I knew it was bad. And I was going on faith that this was the work I had to do to get to the point where maybe someday I could do something worthwhile. And I will say it's as hard as it ever was, even after 30 years. I mean, writing for most of us is extremely difficult. I mean, to see things clearly for what they are, and then to find the language appropriate to that reality that we discover, that's a really hard thing. And I mean, if there was an award or a prize out there that would make writing easier, writers would kill for that award. But the thing about awards is they're nice, but when Monday comes around and you sit down at the desk, you realize it's as hard as ever. And it's going to be the same struggle it's always been. And so, you know, writers have to be born to that struggle. That's what we do. That's our work. And I will say I like what I write better than I did those first 4 or 5 years. And I took a lot of pleasure over the years, especially those first years, of seeing myself getting better slowly. And I think that's what kept me going.
I'm so happy to hear that. I understand there are some university graduate students in the audience, and this is a very important message, and it's an important message for all of us, for all of the students in the audience and educators and all of us who write or do anything. We have to practice. We get better. We really do get better. So I really appreciate that message. You are the third lawyer in as many weeks. I've interviewed quite a few authors in the last month, and you are the third person, the first lawyer who's left lawyering to write books. What is up with that? What do you think is up with that?
Well, I think it may have to do with the fact that, I mean, the law is words. And I mean, that's basically what the law is. And you go into a law school or a law library and it's, you know, stacks and stacks and levels of books. It's words. And so I think law school naturally attracts people who have some facility with words. And also we're the people who are no good at math and science. And so we ended up in law school as opposed to medical school. But I would just say, I think it has more to do with words are the thing that are in common between law and writing. And, you know, to go a little bit deeper than that, I think most serious writing, and that doesn't mean it can't be funny, but most serious writing that's taking a good hard look at human experience, it has a great deal to do with basic justice, basic fairness. I mean, that's often the problem at the root of the plot, is somebody's gotten shafted. Somebody has been wronged. Someone is not getting what they deserve or they've earned. And I think if we dig down deep enough, justice is at the heart of a lot of fiction writing and nonfiction writing of the more serious kind.
I want to ask you about Billy Lynn's long halftime walk. So this is the novel that you read from the novel about the Iraq War. So just a little bit of background, and you shared some of this. The Bush administration has sent the men of the Bravo Squad, 8 men who survived a firefight, on a victory tour to help do a little damage control and bump up the image of the war, the impression of the war, and this really contentious decision to send troops over there. So they're sent to do this halftime show at Texas stadiums where they will be the guests of a Dallas football team. Billy Lynn is the main character, and he's deeply influenced by the mentorship of Sergeant Shroom, who died at Al-Ansakar. But Billy is now on this tour with these men of Bravo who survived. The novel takes place over the course of one day, and the stadium it's this really interesting space for me for all of the action. It's always seemed a little bit like the hero's journey from mythology, many twists and turns. The men ascend and they descend. And I watched the movie again recently with a different kind of eye because I knew I was going to talk to you. And I had reread the novel, but I was really struck watching the movie. They're always getting up and sitting back down, getting up, and they're in the audience and they're not. They're sitting in the bleachers and then they're not. And there's this just constant motion and momentum that builds to the halftime. And this is also a frame story in a way that I thought was really interesting, and I thought our audience would find really interesting. That this is a story also, and I'm thinking about all of the things that you and Secretary Castro were talking about. This is also a story about a family in Stovall, Texas, that's dealing with a lot of these things that you all were talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about that family?
I was really struggling with this book. I struggle with everything, but I was really struggling with this book. I was trying to work in Billy's family backstory in bits and pieces. I didn't want to take us outside the action at the stadium. And after a while, I realized, no, I'm going to have to do this very inelegant thing. I'm going to have to take Billy home. So there's going to have to be an extended flashback. That's the only way I'm going to get inside this person. And a lot of what we do when we do this kind of work, it has to be, we go by instinct and intuition and desperation. It's just like, well, this isn't working, so I'll try this. And so I took Billy home, and I didn't know who those people were, who they were going to be. You're kind of feeling your way along sentence by sentence, and gradually they started to reveal themselves. I did know that his sister, Catherine, would have had her own trauma in the recent past, and she's recovering from that. But the other pieces of the puzzle, they just kind of evolved over the course of many drafts. But once I had taken Billy home and had seen what happened there, that's when the novel really started to click. But I had to take him home to do that.
I really perceive that too. And I feel like the film adaptation, even though it treats it very differently in the chronology, I thought it was very effective there too. So I compared the two, the film and the book, and I thought it was obviously for film adaptation, certain liberties have to be taken. There's a little bit of license, and I thought it was effective. Ben, I want to ask you about an uncomfortable topic. So appropriation. It's an uncomfortable subject because there's this tendency today to look at things through this lens where in publishing, people are canceled if readers feel that there's something inauthentic about the authorship or the presumed intention of the author. And it can reach a strange point sometimes that leaves us, second guessing every other thing. What story can I tell? Can I write a short story from the perspective of a man, or of somebody in 1920? So where do you draw the line? So it can be a little bit maddening to think about it. So all that aside now, or given all of that, what has it meant to you that your novel has been so well received by military veterans and the families of military veterans?
It means the world. I really wondered, and I still wonder, if I had the right to try to write a book like this, because it wasn't my own experience. And anytime you're dealing with matters of life and death, with blood, I mean, you're getting into sacred territory. And you have the utmost obligation to authenticity and genuineness if you're going to go down that road. I mean, you have to earn the right. And even then, I think there's still going to be a question as to whether you can really earn the right to do it. I think bottom line is, I didn't wake up one day and think to myself, oh, I'll write about this war. It was a long time coming. And it was a powerful thing in me. I felt like I had to try to write this book or I wouldn't have any peace in myself. And so, ultimately, what matters is the words on the page and whether they are an authentic portrayal of a particular human experience. And it really doesn't matter who wrote it, as long as it's correct and genuine and reveals something about human experience that might be useful for the rest of us in trying to understand our lives. But it's a live issue, appropriation and who has the right to write what. It's something I think about a lot. And I've crossed a lot of borders in my writing. And the novel I'm working on right now is set in Haiti. It's got a lot of Haitian characters. Do I have the right to write that book? That's an open question. And I can certainly see the other side of it. Ben Fountain doesn't have the right to do that. I will say that, again, it's a powerful thing in me. And I think writers, if they're going to do anything worthwhile, they have to be able to follow their heads and their hearts, where their heads and their hearts lead them. And then the question is, did they do it correctly? Did they write the story correctly? And if they did, then I think it doesn't really matter who wrote it. It's just, we have a useful book now, a book that helps to illuminate human experience. And that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you, speaking of Haiti, about writing about place. This anthology, Historia to Zion, you wrote the foreword. It's stories of risk and abandon from Ecatone's first decade. I really enjoyed reading this anthology of essays. But there's this tremendous foreword, Ben, that you wrote, and I wish I could read it right now to everybody, the whole thing, but I won't. But I will read a small excerpt, a short excerpt. You say, "Am I here only? On the contrary, I'm scattered all over creation. This freedom is truly something new under the sun, this almost effortless liberation of awareness from place. It will be interesting to see how the human animal fares in this uncharted territory, especially considering that we are, in essence, sensory creatures. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. So much of our humanity resides in our senses, as shown by how completely we fall apart in their absence. But someone in solitary confinement 24/7, and he quickly loses his mind. Subjects in sensory deprivation experiments start to hallucinate within hours. a solitary cell, a sensory deprivation chamber. These may be as near as we get to being no place in this life without leaving it completely, and one wonders how close the digital world is to this neighborhood of no place. Without our senses to anchor us, might everywhere start to thin at some point into a fog that feels very much like nowhere. The digital world is great for visuals, wonderful for its delivery of glorious sounds, but a wasteland when it comes to our other senses. Cut off sensory information, we're apt to find ourselves unmoored, floating in limbo, susceptible to being literally and figuratively lost. So I emailed you yesterday about how I read these words so differently today versus the times that I've read these words before because of the pandemic and because we're in this virtual space. But the idea of place is very important, and you refer to all of the times and all of the ways that you've had to cross borders to do your work. And your work in Haiti. In this book, I think it's something like 4 of the stories take place in Haiti. Can you talk to us about this place for you and what Haiti means to you?
Well, I had been writing for a couple of years, and by then I was learning to pay attention to where my head and my heart were leading, and I found myself focusing more and more on Haiti. And I grew up as a white middle-class American male, and in a certain milieu, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a fairly limited slice of human experience. And I started thinking there is a huge segment of reality out there that I really know nothing about. I can know intellectually by reading, lots of different things, but to actually engage in it, I haven't done that. And I felt like to be the kind of writer I thought I might want to be, I needed to go. I needed to try to engage as best I could with that other reality, that reality of a place where people live on $2 or less a day, where survival is a real struggle. And how did it come to be? I mean, in a world where there's so much wealth and so much prosperity, why are there places like Haiti? And what is the life there? And so I had a notion for a novel. And so I started going to Haiti. I'd never been out of the country. Again, just a very provincial, limited guy. And I just started showing up. I didn't know anybody. And over time, you meet people, and through them, you meet other people, and you build relationships, and you start to get into, the life of the country. That was in 1991. I started going, but it was out of this suspicion that there's this entire other reality out there that's connected with my reality. I need to go and meet it and engage with it, and so that's what I did.
So in that collection, Brief Encounters with Che Guevara, there's a 2013 article in The Guardian that mentions the way that your work analyzes the American identity in a wider world. So I'm glad you've explained that. Now, we were also exchanging a couple of emails yesterday I told you about this novel I recently read by Ry Curtis called Kingdom Tide. His protagonist is a woman in her 90s, and she is now in an assisted living home recounting something that happened to her when she was 71 years old. She'd been in a small plane with her husband flying to Montana. The plane crashes and everybody dies except for Cloris Waldrop. And she spends months out there in the wilds of Montana trying to survive. And a hermit, this reclusive person who's hiding out, no spoilers, appears, and he helps her part of the time, and it becomes the closest relationship she's ever really had with anyone, as we soon discover. But but he has such a questionable past, and like really questionable, like really. But in her narrative, she says at one point, I have found that morality is not the anchor of goodness. I have found that morality is not the anchor of goodness, and that a person is too many things to be the one thing that we all want them to be for our convenience. So when I was rereading Che Guevara, there were a couple of times where old Cloris just came into view saying these words, sort of, poking her head in. And then I wrote to you about this too, as Billy Lynn said, that, people like Cloris, she has spent 71 years not traveling, really not doing anything. And then she has this one opportunity to venture out. And then they were from Amarillo, Texas originally. And then this terrible thing happens. And I said to you, as Billy Lynn said, she has to go somewhere else to grow up. She has to go somewhere else to grow up, a woman at her age. So for her, this woman telling the story in her early 90s, that somewhere is Montana. But in your stories, Ben, the idea can come through other means as your characters are encountering these other concerns. I mean, we see it with Billy Lynn. And I mentioned Frank O'Connor's work to you as well. In The Lonely Voice, he says that the short story, not the novel, the short story is what democratized literature. The Lonely Voice is a book that's based on a series of lectures that O'Connor did at Stanford in 1961, 60 years ago. But I still think about him probably every day and these ideas. This idea of the democratization of literature, that all stories are about loss. That's what connects us. And he also talked about, he called them submerged populations, really to mean marginalized groups, the everyman, the little guy, right? And he does refer to them as the little men, unfortunately or fortunately. And the idea was that the characters in short stories they're just resonant and relatable, and these are stories that illuminate uncomfortable truths for the rest of us. So the book's a little dated, and he said some really unkind things about Catherine Mansfield that I still scratch my head over. But I would like to hear your thoughts on this idea, on the short story is not better, but just different from the novel in these important ways, and maybe to talk about one of your stories. And O'Connor also said the protagonists are not heroes. They're not heroic. And that's why they're so resonant, I suppose. But so how, thinking about old Frank O'Connor and these ideas, I think I'm just always trying to champion the short story. And I just love these stories, and I hope everybody reads them if they haven't done so already. But how do you think about this idea of all stories are about loss?
I think there's a lot to that. I mean, that's what life is, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, as we go through our lives, we gain things, we gain people, we lose things, we lose people. I mean, death is the ultimate reality of life. And if we live long enough, we lose a number of the people who we love. That is a harsh truth. It is an irreconcilable truth. You can't solve death. And so how do we deal with it? What gets us through it? I mean, death is a crisis, the death of someone close to us. I mean, you can't solve it. You can't bring them back. I think one of the great solaces we have in life, one of the great sources of wisdom we have in life, one of the great sources of what's going to sustain us through our losses is literature. because the serious writers, and again, that doesn't mean they can't be funny, but they are grappling with this all the time. How do we go on? How do we pick ourselves up, collect our emotions and our psyches and our intellect and carry on with life after these tremendous losses? And I mean, there is so little in mainstream culture that will sustain us through our crises. I mean, we live in a trash culture. I mean, so much of what's around us is somebody trying to sell us something. It's hard to, well, it's not hard, but it takes an act of will for us to seek out, those people who've come before us or who are among us now, who are really trying to see things as clearly as they can, trying to see reality for what it is, and then expressing what they find in the clearest, most accurate language possible in a way that will hopefully illuminate our own experience. And I think books are one of those places we go to. Not all books, and not every book for every person. I mean, it's but if we read, if we're consistent readers, we will from time to time come across a book that cracks us open and makes us different. It's an experience, and we can be stronger people for it. We have more reserves to carry us through the hardships and crises of life.
You say something that reminds me of what another author whose work I read recently. She is Fiona King Foster. She's a debut novelist. She wrote a novel called The Captive. And in a conversation, she said to me, we need to read the way athletes eat. You have to be very selective. And those books are out there. Those books are out there that can help us along on our long race. So I'm very mindful of the time, but I want to do in the few minutes that are left, Ben, if you don't mind, I want to do just a quick lightning round of some fun questions that I don't know. I read this interview with Paul Theroux yesterday on LitHub, and I just like the questions so much. And I'm giving credit to LitHub for most of these questions. I did sort of tweak them a little bit. So Ben, who do you most wish would read Beautiful Country Burn Again?
That raises an interesting question. Do books change anything? I mean, if Dick Cheney read Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, would he put the book down and say, I was wrong about everything? Oh, what a huge mistake I've made.
Who's to say?
Probably not. And so I think, it takes a particular book at a particular moment in a person's life. Are they open to it? Mm-hmm. Are they open to the experience of that book? Who would I want to read Billy Lynn's Beautiful Country Burn Again? I just don't know. Oprah.
That's a great answer. What do you always want to talk about in interviews but never get to?
TV.
Oh, yes.
I think TV has gotten short shrift in literature. I mean, you read these stories in the New Yorker and everywhere, and they never talk about what they're watching on TV. Whereas, I mean, how many hours a day do most of us spend watching TV? Actually, too much, in my case. My guilt is assuaged somewhat by the fact that there's a lot of good TV out there. I mean, there's some amazing shows, but TV is a big part of our lives, and I think it needs to be explored more. And also, it's almost like when you get into literature, TV becomes like this other planet, but it's really a big part of contemporary life.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great answer. Is there one show? Do you want to name one show that you'd recommend? Besides the news, cable. Besides the news.
Besides the news, there have been a lot of great shows in the last few years. I really liked The Wire. I thought that was an extraordinary show. We're watching The Bureau right now. That's a French show. The Eddy, which was a wonderful show about an American jazz musician who ends up in Paris. So those three.
Oh, wonderful. I'll be looking for those. Okay. Best writing advice you ever received? I bet that's a tough one. I couldn't answer it right away.
The main thing about writing is writing.
Oh, yeah.
If you're, and I think V.S. Nepal said that, if you're going to be a writer, there's no way around it. You've got to sit your butt down in the chair and start working to get the words on the page.
And lastly, you made a very difficult decision when you left your law practice to write full time. I'm sure it was difficult for you and for your family. I work with students who make big life choices like this too. Really, really difficult sacrifices. Knowing that there are so many young people in our audience right now, and people at or near the precipice of these big life transitions, going to college, staying in grad school, maybe going off to do a PhD. What advice can you... Oh, I know. What would Shroom say?
Oh, Shroom, the Bodhisattva. You know, I mean, writing is a struggle. Writing is difficult. It's also a wonderful way to live because you can't coast through life. You have to be alert. I mean, you have to be alive. You have to be aware to your own life and the lives around you and the wider world. Writing is hard. The economic factor in this particular society is an equal challenge. I mean, to be an artist in American society in 2021 is to say no to virtually everything this society wants you to want. And you have to live a different way. You have to live a kind of guerrilla life where you try to get your art done in the midst of finding a way to keep body and soul together, you know, to live and to find healthcare and to have some kind of security for yourself and your family. So it is a real struggle. And I think it has to be a powerful thing in you if you're going to undertake that kind of life. It can also be tremendously satisfying too. I mean, to live life as an artist. So, and I would never say to anyone, you have to write or you should write, because it's such a momentous and personal decision. It's like, and also it's a huge gamble in so many ways. And so only a particular individual can make that choice for himself or herself. But there's a lot going against you, but there's also great satisfaction to be had.
Well, I, for one, am glad you rolled the dice, Ben. So
thank you.
I do have some questions from some of our students in the audience. So this is from Marisa Trevino. She's from Incarnate Word High School. She says, what is the most difficult part of writing for you? The most difficult part?
Marisa, first drafts. First drafts are agony, they're pain, they're torture. I hate them. They hate me. But I mean, it's like you're in a catch-22. The only way you can write the story, I mean, to write the story, you have to know what the story is. But the only way you know what the story is by writing the story. And so, I mean, where do you start? Well, you start with that ugly, nasty, horrific beast called the first draft, where you're creating the problem for yourself. I mean, in most areas of life, the problem is created for us. If you're a doctor, the patient comes in and says, "Doc, you know, I'm hurting here," or somebody, if you're a lawyer, they come in and say, hey, I'm getting sued. Can you help me out? The writer has to create his or her own problem to begin with. So we have to expend huge amounts of energy just to get to the starting line. And then, we can go forward and solve the problem. So if first drafts seem painful and hard and agonizing, I think that's a genuine feeling. First drafts are hard.
Thank you, Marisa and Incarnate Word High School. And Sydney Holmes from Harlan High School asks, what rules and ethics do you apply when deciding whether or not to write on a topic?
What rules or ethics? Good question, Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the obligation of the writer to dig as deeply into that particular subject or experience as possible. And so if it's an experience outside of your own experience, that means tremendous amounts of knowledge you have to gain by whatever means. But beyond that, then there's also the imaginative effort, going from that knowledge to getting inside the skin of the particular human who's undergoing that experience. And so digging down as deeply as possible, being as genuine as you can, and getting into the skin and nerves of that person so that you can write the story authentically. I mean, that's the obligation, that's the ethic, to be as true to the story as you can be. And however much work it takes, I mean, you can't justify it on a cost-benefit analysis. It's just the nature of the beast. You will just have to spend whatever amount of time it takes to get it right.
Thanks, Sydney. And I wonder if I should have said Harlandale High School. I'm sorry about that. Julián Bolado of Incarnate Word High School asks, why do you think it's so important to write about political issues?
Yeah, that's where my head and my heart lead me. I mean, to basic questions of justice. And politics is power. It's society. It's who has the power, who has the wealth, who's getting screwed. I mean, who's on bottom and who's on top. Basic questions of justice. And I mean, they affect us in our most interior lives. Hopefully, if I'm writing about, quote, politics, it's coming from the inside out. I mean, from the characters, and it's working its way out. I think any piece of writing that's doing its work, it's ultimately going to be political. It's ultimately going to be making a comment on the society that character lives in, even if the political content is not overt. So that's what I would say.
And my bad, it was Harlan High School. Sorry about that, guys. So let's see. Then there are so many questions. There are so many wonderful questions from so many attentive folks in the audience. Let's see. Tatiana Valdez from Harlan High School asks, how has your personal life affected your writing?
Tatiana, the personal life is always there. And the longer I've done this kind of work, the more I realize that a big part of doing it is digging down deeply as I can into my own experience and my own emotions and my own intellect. I think, Norman Mailer said an interesting thing once. I mean, he said and did many silly things. He also said and did many profound things. And one of the things he said was, if there's 5% of a character in me, I can pull that 5% out and develop it and make a genuine character out of it. And Norman Mailer was a writer who wrote a novel from the point of view of Satan. And he also wrote a novel from the point of view of Jesus Christ. And so there you've got the extremes of, good and evil there. And Mailer is saying, I have both in me. I think all of us are equally complex. And doing this kind of work, over time, you learn how to tap into and dig down into your own personality for the things that will be useful in the particular thing you're writing about.
Thank you all for these wonderful questions. There are more questions, Ben, and they're all great questions, smart questions. So, but alas, it is now time to introduce the Gemini Inc. board president, Charles Masiat. Ben, I want to thank you first. Thank you so much. It's just my honor to be able to talk to you in front of this Gemini Inc. family and the audience here today. So thank you so much.
Yvette, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure. And Gemini Inc. board president, Charles Masiat.
Great to be here with you all. Thank you so much, Ben and Yvette, for such a rich discussion about the writing arts. Thank you, Ben, for joining us in this virtual space to share your experiences on your unique writing journey. I hope the future writers out there learn some key advice from this discussion. Gemini Inc.'s board and staff would like to thank all of our speakers and viewers for joining in our celebration of the literary arts today. We also appreciate Secretary Castro for joining us for this autograph series luncheon in support of the very important role of our writers and literary artists' voices that play a part in helping us navigate the many challenges of our times and to empower us to embrace our own stories. We're so proud to be at the heart of the writing arts in a city like San Antonio, with its rich diversity of voices. We hope you enjoyed meeting one of our most thought-provoking literary voices of our times tonight, or this afternoon, rather. Through this reading and conversation with New York Times bestseller Ben Fountain. We ask that you would help Gemini Inc. To keep going strong so we can continue to inspire San Antonians to bring great stories to life. You can consider contributing to our literary course in any way you can, to our courses, for projects like this, for conversations like this, for events that can help us empower our literary selves. Simply go to GeminiInc.com/donate. No gift is too small. I also encourage you to learn about some of our upcoming online workshops, free Zoom author talks, and more. We wish to be a part of your literary journey in 2021 and in the future. So again, www.GeminiInc.org to learn about our year-round programs and literary arts outreach. We are your literary home. That said, stay safe. We look forward to seeing you at an upcoming Gemini Inc. event or a program. Best wishes. Godspeed.